And this relates to what Laurie spoke about previously, but also in terms of some of the previous speakers about the impacts on our biophysical environments that receive wastewater. So it links in with those elements. So again, like Laurie, I'm a bit focused on the end of the cycle, but inevitably there's all sorts of economic and social and governance problems, as we know from Clean Ocean Foundation's policy prescriptions, with the way that we look after the whole life cycle of water, isn't there? But in terms of the outfalls themselves, the way that we manage water, we're moving what's called from an empty world to a full world. So we're converting our natural capital to man-made capital. And as a result of that, on this diagram on the right, we're making the economy a much larger part of our total biosphere. And we're replacing natural capital with man-made capital. As a result, the ecosystem services which our natural environment can provide us are becoming quite small. This is on the bottom section to the full world, and we're relying more heavily on the economic services provided by built environments. And then as we're moving to a fuller world, we move we have this entropy throughput, which is the second law of thermodynamics. So we're moving from a level of high usefulness to low usefulness, and that's inevitably what we do as humans in our production and consumption. And this comes from some of the work of Georgescu-Roegen, but also Herman Daly. And this is the foundation for what's considered ecological economics. So we have this problem with our world in the sense of entropy throughput. And while recycling may help, inevitably, as we consume more matter and energy and fill our world, we also will have a significant impact on our ecosystems, our oceans, and our waterways. Next slide, please, Lyndall. We're also filling or breaching a number of our limits in terms of the capacity of our oceans and waterways to act as sinks. We've talked a little bit today about toxins, the microplastics, etc. But importantly, also our oceans and our atmosphere have the limits that they can assimilate these things have been breached. And this is part of the work of Stefan et al. In 2015. Next slide, please, Lyndall. Importantly, the third point I'd like to make is that the way that we manage this whole system of water use and disposal is unethical. I think this is fundamentally why COF exists, is because we see the wrong that's done by parts or parts of our communities. For example, the wastewater from Melbourne CBD being disposed in other localities or in the backyards of other communities. And inevitably across the globe, we see that movement of waste moves from the haves to the have-nots. So those who can least afford it and who need to receive well-being and welfare from ecosystem services. But as we degrade those ecosystems, including our coasts, oceans, etc., with wastewater and high levels of wastewater, then we're placing a much larger burden on those who can least afford it. So there's this current generational inequity that's associated with it, unethical, but also intergenerational inequity too, in terms of entropy throughput, in terms of what Georgescu-Roegen and Daly were talking about. So that's the fundamental problem with human growth and our continued need for, to grow our populations, but also inherently to grow our water use. And we can become more efficient with our water use, but inevitably we will consume more water as our population grows, and we will begin to fill more of our world with man-made capital rather than relying on the ecosystem goods and services of our natural environments. Last slide, please, Lyndall. And then finally, fourth point I'd like to make is that upgrading is actually showing, even if we revert back to classical economics, the upgrades make sense. Some of the work we did from moving from primary and secondary to tertiary, we found that the net benefits to Australians are between 12 and 28 million. I suppose the next step here, if we wanted to just look at classical economics, would be, what's the movement from tertiary to potable? But again, just be conscious of this concept of entropy throughput, in that it isn't necessarily a circular system in terms of the flow of matter and energy through an ecosystem. And that's been clearly made that point has been clearly identified by Georgescu-Roegen and Daly and other ecological founding parents of ecological economics. Thanks.